Greetings. Welcome to the Asana Kitchen podcast. I'm David Garrigues, and today's subject is on using props, modifying, and customizing your practice. And I have an upcoming online course with that very title that I encourage you to join me in. And so I'm just going to discuss the subject some with you. And it's funny, in some ways, I would rather not have such strong feelings as I do about this subject. And so I'm just going to spend a little moment clearing the air, as it were. I have like lots of things to say that can really help you improve your practice. But it seems to me that there's no avoiding, some kind of confrontation about Ashtanga's attitude towards props, and that I just find to be very unfortunate, unnecessary, and inauspicious. And so to modify a pose, or to use a prop like a yoga mat, a block, a wall, or anything at all, a chair, just to give yourself some kind of advantage is just such a standard thing to do in terms of being engaged in the art of hatha yoga. And so the fact that my lineage, my system that I align myself with and that I respect, that it's just an automatic taboo, that every Ashtanga student has to overcome a certain obstacle or feel like they're going against the rules to do this very basic thing in practice. And I truly wish that it was not even, there was no controversy, there was no discussion, and there was no line drawn at all about this idea that somehow, that Ashtanga that's breaking the rules, or you're not doing Ashtanga if you do props, or and so there's a list of statements about props about using props or modifying that I disagree with, and I'm just going to go down that list with you for a moment. And these are kind of suppositions or premises that people that do Ashtanga either somehow quickly adopt. And I would like to think that this is like in the past, and that kind of in the modern take of Ashtanga, that there's more acceptance and tolerance, and that might be true in some circles, but I would say that within the greater majority of Ashtanga, there's still a stigmatism. It's so funny to think. To me, it's just so funny, but also behind my laughing, there's some anger, because it's such a waste, so unnecessary, and such a waste of a valuable resource for practice. But so here's some of these kind of misguided just statements that about the props that Ashtanga students often hold. So the advanced student doesn't use props. That's just simply wrong. Okay, the ideal practice doesn't include props. No, sorry, that's not correct. Props, the less the better, preferably none. Nope. Only older or injured students should or do use props. Nope, not true. Props are a crutch. Nope. You only use a prop because you can't do a pose. Nope. Using a prop is a sign that you are weak or stiff or lack skill. No, false. And if you use props, you aren't doing real Ashtanga. False. Okay, and there's more, but you get the idea of this kind of, it's either underlying or explicit attitude that that I just encourage you to drop or not regard. Okay, now here's some positive facts about using props that I will put out there for you and then talk to you in more detail. So, okay, one, props help you build strength and flexibility by enabling you to more specifically target desirable actions, movements, or positions. Okay, so yeah, they help you to build strength or to get more flexible. So it's not as though it's a crutch or a sign of weakness. No, it's a sign of being smart about how you direct your efforts. Okay, number two, props help you improve the alignment of your body in a position. Okay, and so this is something that pertains to all three subjects of using a prop or modifying a pose or customizing a series, which is that we get a kind of fictionalized ideal about each of the postures in a series, okay? And like even those little cheat sheets that you get, or the posters of the various teachers put up of them doing the poses, every single one of those posters and cheat sheets, they show a person in the very final stage of a pose. And it's rarely acknowledged just how challenging it is to do even the most basic poses well. Okay, and so I liken the primary series to like a kind of a Beethoven symphony. Okay, and as a musician, it takes a huge amount of training, right, to build up to play a Beethoven symphony. And this is the same when, as a student of yoga, it's years to be able to do the final position of all these poses in the primary series. And yet when we take to Ashtanga, we almost immediately hold ourselves to that standard, saying that we should be able to do triangle, Marichasana D, Kurmasana, Upavishta Konasana, all these poses. And we also make the assumption that that a beginner musician would never make, which is that the best way to learn the Beethoven symphony is to just play it over and over the best that you can, even if you make like thousands of mistakes, and that eventually you'll learn to do it. But that isn't the case, right? That you have to back things out, scale things back, and modify, customize, come up with steps in a progression that lead to the final position. And this is the subject of the course that I have coming up. But it's also just a central theme of yoga practice. And it's not, see, in this process of finding steps in a progression, it doesn't like begin when you start third series and the pose is obviously hard. No, it starts right there in Surya Namaskara A. That downward dog is a hard pose to do and requires a lot of careful attention to detail and skillful practice, which for me involves using props, like putting your hands up on, elevating your hands in downward dog is an excellent practice, or going down on your knees instead of having your legs straight. And you do these, everyone does these things, not just the stiffer student or the weaker student or the older student or the injured student. No, it's just, it's like part of how you research a pose, how you come to know, like, what are the possible objectives of making this shape? Like, what are the goals, and what constitutes perfect, or at least a very good pose? And so these are choices that you want to make as a practitioner. Okay, and so, and for me, that's it's an interesting thing, because it's challenging as a beginner to kind of take stock of a pose or envision what would represent ideal. And so at first you might just get in there and give it a try, and even follow the cheat sheets or the different photos that you see, and follow the instructions of a teacher. But different teachers will give you different priorities or different goals or objectives for doing a pose. And so my recommendation, and how I approach the practice, and why I come up with this placing value on using props or modifying and customizing, is because I actually spend a good deal of time envisioning the pose, envisioning, like, what is the ideal downward dog, or what constitutes like right effort in that pose. And so, and then I communicate that to my students. And see, it's interesting, because, see, part of the mentality of Ashtanga that is challenging is there is a kind of an assumption that just repeating is the best means of doing things, regardless of the quality of your repetition, but just the fact that you repeat. And that's how the saying, do your practice and all is coming, is often interpreted as though that, yeah, you just repeat, and then slowly the different forms, your ability to do them, you take shape. Like, and in a certain gross way, that might be true, but as things play out, as the months unfold, the days and months and years of practice, that way of doing it, that's what I'm saying. It's like practicing the Beethoven symphony over and over, without regard to what the passage is asking of you, and what your individual ability to execute that passage. And so for me, what I end up doing is kind of prioritizing, like, what is important about this pose. And there's this aspect of it that I call making concessions. So this is a big part of yoga, is the art of how to negotiate, how to make concessions. And a concession is to give up or allow something in the face of difficulty. So when something's difficult, you give up something, or you allow something else to happen. And so this is a perfect little microcosm of what happens in a yoga posture. Okay, so, and as a student, you're making concessions just by doing a pose. There's no not making concessions, right? That we don't have the perfect bodies, and we don't have perfect flexibility or perfect strength. And so we're not able to do all these poses perfectly. We go into them and we make concessions, okay? And so, and the problem with simply repeating and doing your best, and hoping that that process of simply repeating and doing your best helps you evolve and have a mature practice and be able to do the postures skillfully, that to me is just not the most efficient or best way to go about it. In fact, that can lead you into harm, into faulty movement patterns, faulty postural habits that the negative effect accumulates over time with repetition. Okay, and this is why I spend a lot of time working with teaching the student to make conscious concessions. Okay, so to give up something on purpose, or to allow something to happen on purpose in the face of difficulty, and then also to take what's valuable about doing the pose and refuse to concede it, to not give it up, or to not allow it to drift away from where you want it to go. So there's this is where props and modifying comes in. It's like, so if you can't do so for instance, if you take Chaturanga Dandasana, so very repeated strength move in the Ashtanga system. Okay? And so the concessions, or you could say the ideal pose that you would want to do is to create, like it's right in the name, four-limbed staff. So Chatur is four, and Anga is limb, and Danda is staff. So 4 limbs, staff pose. And so the priority is in the Danda. Okay, and a danda is a stick or a staff or a lever. So it's a long and strong, like rod-like object, like a tire iron, right? And that's how you're trying to organize your legs, pelvis, torso, and head when you bend your elbows and come down into that position. A very, very challenging thing to do, even though it's so basic and so prominently a prominent part of the practice and so often repeated. Okay, and so what happens is when you go to bend the elbows, the pelvis tips forward. But that pelvis, your pelvis, is part of your danda, or the pelvis stays up as the head and chest go down, or the head goes down first. So there's all these various little shiftings out of position that happen. And so in the standard Ashtanga model, if you just bend your elbows and go down there and try your very best a whole bunch of times, then eventually you'll get strong enough to hold that danda steady. Except for that does not bear out. Okay, and this is why conscious modifying is necessary. You see, because you can say that when your head goes forward, you're modifying the pose. It's just you're doing it you're modifying it in a kind of default way, an unconscious way, and a negative way. Okay, and so 2 ways to encounter the Chaturanga more skillfully, or actually 3 ways. One is to start with plank. Okay, so to make a beautiful danda with your arms straight, and then stabilize your body masses and go for the bending of the elbows. So that's one way, and 2 more are to not go all the way down. So you could say that the ideal of Chaturanga is when your upper arm bone gets parallel to the ground. Okay, that's when you're like at the perfect, you've lowered to the perfect height of Chaturanga. So it's very close to the ground, but not so close that like the shoulders roll forward and spoil the line. But going that low is part of what makes the pose challenging. So you could just bend your elbows, say 2 inches, and really keep the integrity of the danda. You see, and so the concession there is that you don't bend your elbows all the way. Like that's giving up. You're giving up bending your elbows all the way. But you're not conceding the danda. You're not giving up the integrity of the relationship between your head, your pelvis, your head, torso, pelvis, legs. You see, and so the beauty of the asana practice is that it forces you to make concessions. Okay, there's no, and maybe in some poses you'll have an easier time and you won't have to make concessions, but then another pose will come along. And so it makes it so that every student, a big part of their practice is learning to make concessions. And see, this is why, like what I opened the podcast saying, is that customizing and modifying and pulling out props is so basic to the study of the art form that you're studying, right? Like that, it's so essential to to establishing yourself in an effective, safe practice. And so you can modify without props. There's different, and I will be covering that in this course that I'm going to be doing. That there's, but once you allow for using blocks or chairs or walls or whatever, blankets, different things, then you really open up the possibilities for creating appropriate steps and seeing things in progression, so that you can create one step at a time. And as you gain a little more strength or a little more flexibility, then you adjust your equipment, your prop or your modification to suit your new circumstances. So, and this is true of every transition and every pose, that you're kind of sizing up what are the objectives, what's the goal, what constitutes good work, and then learning to set priorities. What do you absolutely have to keep about this, and what can you concede? Yeah, and so and back to our chaturanga example. So the another concession that you can make is to put your hands, elevate your hands on blocks, on one set of blocks or two. So basically, the higher you go, the easier it is to bend your elbows. The less strength is required to bend your elbows, so that you can keep the integrity of your body masses. And this is one of the reasons that putting your hands on blocks is such a great way to develop strength and enjoyment of Chaturanga Dandasana. And yes, putting your hands on blocks is a concession. You're allowing your hands to be on blocks, which is, less than desirable. Or you could say you're giving up putting your hands on the ground. And yet, those concessions are worth it because they make it so you don't have to concede your danda. Whereas if you insist on not using props and going all the way down in chaturanga, well, then you're going to concede your danda. You see? And to me, all of this, what I'm talking about, is elementary. It's like just standard practice procedure. And this is why I get so worked up about the misguided norms of Ashtanga, where you can't readily engage in exactly the kind of dialogue and negotiation that I'm encouraging you. And to my mind is what makes for an intelligent and fun and appropriate practice. Like, that's the thing. That's where all the fun is. Like, in getting to find the step that what step am I on, and how can I modify this so that the effort that I'm directing towards doing this transition or doing this posture feeds me, nourishes me, actually suits my particular set of circumstances. Okay, and so if you really stop to think about it too, you can know that the whole idea of, if you're using a template, a set sequence, a primary series, a second series, then the one size fits all is a recipe for disaster. Okay, like in one sense, it's so helpful, right? You don't have to think about what to do, and it's a good plan. The primary series, it's a good set of postures put in a good order. Okay, but on the other hand, to make the whole point about every student following that exact sequence in that way every day for life. Now this is a real, it's like untenable. It's very harmful to people, but it's also just not a good spirit, not so unnecessary, and just a misinterpretation of what you stand to gain by following a sequence of poses in a certain order, and it's right built into the lineage. Like if you go back into the work of Krishnamacharya, who's the grandfather of it all, of the modern yoga, of both Iyengar and Ashtanga yoga, he just says it straight out that the teacher has to consider all the different variables of each student and assign the appropriate asanas, right? So that, and he includes the age, the work, the kind of kinesthetic capacity, genetic endowment. All these different factors are mixed together to give you a practice that works for you. Okay, and so this is what I focus on in my teaching. And then, so I'm going to continue on with my list a little bit, the positive facts about props. So props, they help you stay in poses longer with more ease. Okay, so this is a very, very important thing. Okay, and the idea of taking 5 breaths in a pose and moving on to the next it's excellent for a kind of a busy householder that is going to do a practice in the morning and then dash off to work for the day and deal with family responsibilities, right? So that if you get this sequence and you stay in the pose for a few breaths and move on and keep moving, there's a good rhythm to it, and you get a nice practice. Okay, but part of that prescription was that at least one day a week, a student was encouraged to spend, like on Saturdays, say, or Sundays, on the weekend, to spend 3 hours or doing the practice, slowing things down, staying in the poses, and certainly as you move from the beginner, novice stage into the intermediate or the veteran and mastery, advanced student, staying in the pose becomes de rigueur, becomes just a standard thing that you do. Okay, and you realize that the 5 breath recipe is never was intended to be 5 breaths per pose for life, right? It's just a thing that gets you into the great art. Okay, and so it's wonderful to know how to modify a pose or use a prop to make it easy enough to stay longer, and really explore what that pose is about. And that goes for really basic poses like seated meditation pose, Baddha Konasana, or inversions like shoulder stand. But it even goes for really difficult poses like 3rd series arm balances or a challenging back bend. There's ways to modify those and make them easier so that you can explore and stay in them longer with more ease. Okay, and then another thing about props is they help make your pose safer. So you can use props to protect your body. Okay, and many different examples, but like sitting on a blanket in when you do Asana, say, it helps you to keep your weight forward into your legs, so that so you're not back sitting on your pelvis in a backward tilt, which is it's not really that healthy for your pelvis or your spine. And there's just many examples where just modifying a pose, or even the chaturanga example that I gave earlier, when you do a position that helps you maintain the integrity of your body masses and the horizontal axis, that's protecting you, right? Because putting your head forward or rolling your shoulders forward or lifting up your pelvis, and these discrepancies, they're not just like some kind of personal preference. I mean, there's a beauty aspect, but there's a alignment, like your skeleton is meant to function in a certain way. And the more you're using your skeleton as it's meant to be used, the safer you're working. And this is true in a kind of immediate sense, in a temporary sense, but it's even more true with the repetition and the piling up of days and months of practice. Okay, so you want to make sure that you're using your skeleton well, so that 10 years, 15 years, 20 years down the road, you still have a fit body for doing basic things like walking, standing, sitting, but also for doing your beloved asanas. Okay, and here's another thing about props that is really good, and modifying as well, which is props help you to break difficult poses up into logical, manageable steps that progress from easier to more difficult. So that's just that simple, okay? And this is part of customizing your practice as well, is how do you do this? How do you look at a pose and know that that it challenges you, and how it challenges you, and then how can you kind of back it out and break it up into a logical sequence of appropriate steps. And this is the beauty and the fun and the interest of props, is that of props, but also just of modifying, of thinking about your approach to a pose differently, and having more to bring to your work than simply giving your best try every day, kind of regardless of the specific details of the trying. Just like get in there, look at the picture and try to make that shape to the best of your ability, and whatever limits or whatever kind of shape your body makes by default, that's what you have to bring. And see, in this, I'm trying to steer you away from. And I'm trying to give you a much more ability to size up the variables, to factor in your own individual body and circumstances, and then come up with a good plan. Okay, and then here's some other ones, other positive facts about props or modifying, so that props, they help you pinpoint what has value in doing a pose. And then beyond pinpointing what value, they help you to bring excellence to your efforts, excellence to your efforts to draw forth what has value. You see, and this is what I love. This is one of my favorite things about using steps, modifying a pose by breaking it into steps, and using props, is that, you see, like, because if you put your hands on blocks and lower yourself into chaturanga, your chances of creating a perfect danda, like beautiful form, are good, really high. Okay, and so it's amazing to me. And the only price you had to pay to do that is put your hands on blocks. But otherwise, in every other respect, you've got a perfect chaturanga. See, in props, they give you that ability to like really make what's important about the pose come to perfection or near perfection. And this is a very valuable experience, something so cool. And that brings me to the next point about it, which is that props are fun and they add interest and variety to the repetitive process of doing poses day after day. Yeah, it's quite, I find it quite humorous to find myself doing a really hard pose, but I'm using props, but I'm doing it. And yeah, and like in a perfect world, I wouldn't need to use those props to do that perfect pose. But what can I say? I'm not in a perfect world. And so why shall I deny myself that experience of what amounts to supreme enjoyment? Because, when it comes down to it, doing chaturanga, a perfect chaturanga on blocks, or doing a perfect chaturanga on the ground, there isn't that much difference. Okay, and the same, like if you do a drop back and you touch the wall, like pretty high up the wall, but you do it perfectly, like you make the whole setup, the gesture into the position and come to a nice destination and then come back up with a move, you've done it. I mean, you get almost all of the benefits and the satisfaction of doing a drop back, even though you haven't gone all the way to the ground. You see, and the same cannot be said for if you kind of break all kinds of rules, but get your hands all the way to the ground when you do a drop back, like turning your feet out and tucking your pelvis under and flattening your spine. See, all of these things, they might get you to be able to drop back to the floor, but those concessions you're making to do it are not worth it. And it's funny because it can take you a while to understand. You see, there's a cathartic satisfaction, you could say. There's some kind of feeling of a real accomplishment if you drop back to the ground, no matter what the quality of it is, right? And people, to me, that might be okay like once or twice. Like, you just, okay, I did it. But the moment that you've succeeded in that, then you've got to go back and go, okay, now how can what's the priorities here? What's important about doing this? And how can I make sure that I'm prioritizing what's important? And what step is right for me in this? And what surprises me is people being willing to concede very valuable parts of doing a pose habitually, day after day. You see, and that just does not, I'm not an advocate of that. So it does take a switch in perspective, though. You could say that there's a certain kind of heroism to dropping back to the ground no matter what. It's like climbing a mountain and just gritting it out. And you look like kind of like the tortoise versus the hare when there you are with your little move of dropping back to the wall, even though it's got all the, it's aligned and it's got integrity throughout the parts. And so I do understand the cathartic yearning for catharsis, but it's something that you have to balance with sober kind of rational intelligence as you work in your poses. Okay, and then another one is props help you to learn more about what a pose could be or is meant to be, and on how it's meant to be done, or what you could express through doing that shape. So that's it's one of the cool things is that there's so many different creative ways to approach a pose. And when you, as soon as you allow like a wall or a chair or, some outer object to enter into your dance and allow yourself to take advantage of something, dimensions open up, play opens up, and yeah, just different experience of the pose and different kind of new insight into the possibilities that that pose or shape or transition or movement offers. Okay, so that's a little discussion on a big subject, and so hope you enjoyed it. And I would love to have you join me in this upcoming course. It starts January 20th, and you can get the particulars of it all on my website. I will tell you, you can come to the live class. It's on the weekend, or you can do the recorded class at your leisure. And so, thank you for joining me for this installment of the Asana Kitchen podcast, and namaste.